Welcome to Talk Design Podcast, the space where creativity meets conversation. I'm Adrian Ramsey, your host, and as someone deeply entrenched in the world of design, I'm thrilled to introduce you to the minds that inspire me in the hope that they will spark something special within you too. From a design past crafting women's swimwear to pushing the boundaries of performance sportswear, from mountaineering to international yachting, to implementing systematic innovation solutions that transcend boundaries in aerospace industry. My heart remains rooted in architecture, and exploring the emotional tapestry woven by built spaces is my fascination. My journey in design has been what can only be described as a life of design. I want to thank you for lending me your ears. I'm eager to embark on this next episode together. My guest on Talk Design today is someone a little different from the usual design crowd that I have for you. He is a demographer. He lives in Australia. He's from Germany originally, so this guy's got his boundaries, as you'll find out. He does have a huge influence over the world of demographics and the prediction of demographics and what happens as well. You know, with over 30 million people jumping on his X account a month to have a look at what he thinks is happening in the world. That's along with all the other things that he does. But he's a speaker, an author, and a consultant. And Simon, welcome to Talk Design.
Thank you for having me on.
You are so welcome, man. I was lucky enough to see you and meet you last year at an event that you spoke at. And as I was just saying to you before, you know, I've been to a lot of events. I've seen a lot of people speak. And when I heard that they had a demographer, my heart sank. And then when I heard you were from Germany, my heart sank further. I thought, oh my God, I'm just going to sleep through this for sure. And beyond being pleasantly surprised, I was enlightened with so many pieces. I came away thinking, man, not only were you an incredible presenter, funny, playful, but with facts, that I thought that it was just incredible. It left me with my head spinning. It's still spinning from just then. I constantly go these questions and I go, what did he say? I'll go back through my notes to see what you said around those things. So I want to start out with, how did this German boy end up deciding that this could even be something that people did? I knew people did it, but I've never heard of anybody that had done it before. Tell me the story.
Dumb luck is the well and only answer I could possibly give you. I was very much unsure what to do with my life after high school and figured, I did kind of enjoy geography. So did that, went to university in Berlin, geography degree, but I actually always wanted to go to study in the US. It was the big dream to end up in the US. But I always wanted to go to the University of Illinois in Chicago. Because they have a famous school of geography. So I figured that's awesome. I want to go there and picked my university in Germany because they had an exchange program with the University of Illinois in Chicago. So I figured first day of uni, I go into the exchange office and I go, yo, I'm Simon. I want to go on exchange to Chicago because I couldn't possibly afford the high American school fees. And they said, yeah, give me your student card. And they're like, mate, you are not a medical student. This is only for medical students. I'm like, oh, damn it. So I can't do this. And so I said like, hey, I'm Simon. I want to go to the US then. Just send me anywhere. And they said, well, if you apply tomorrow, you make the deadline for the University of Tulsa in Oklahoma. And I did send in an application. I got the spot mostly because I was the only applicant. So I did end up studying for a little while in Tulsa and really loved it. I loved studying in English. I somehow thought this was more concise studying in English, just
Really?
enjoyed being in English. I had a great time there. This exchange came to an end, and you were only allowed one exchange at university. But I remembered when I booked the American trip that there were two doors at the office, one for the Northern Hemisphere and one for the Southern Hemisphere. And so I figured, well, maybe they don't talk to each other. So maybe I just go into the Southern Hemisphere door as well and pretend that I'm not lying. I'm just not saying that I've been.
It's
And
called
so,
lying by omission, I think, isn't it? Lying by omission.
technically, but I'm not in court here, so. And so I just then had a look at the map and I was like, yeah, I only speak English well enough to go to uni. And there was a limited number of countries that I could go to study again abroad for free. And so I then ended up in Melbourne, University of Melbourne in Australia. And I studied there for a year and then fell in love with a girl. And then this turned into, I've been here for, what is it, 17, 18 years now. So I, by sheer dumb luck, ended up in Australia. The academic thing just pushed me into geography, human geography, which is kind of like the urban dynamics, how we function as cities and so forth. And worked as a data analyst after uni. Everyone is allowed to do this,
Yeah,
essentially. And then stumbled across a thing called KPMG demographics,
sure.
way well over a decade ago. And it blew my little mind that you were allowed to do just the fun bits for a living. I didn't know that. I was like, that's literally just the stuff that I really am interested in.
Yeah,
And so
wow.
I got a job with KPG Demographics, and about 9 years ago, we did create the demographics group as a spin-off from that.
Hmm.
And now this is what we do. We consult anyone who's willing to listen to pay for on the demographic perspective, because that's ultimately what I well and truly believe is that you become a better parent, boss, designer, politician, whatever it is, if you view the world from multiple perspectives, the more, the better. And we offer you the demographic perspective. It's not the one and true only perspective. That would be a dumb statement. I would say it's a crucial perspective because so much of market movements, so much, to be honest, of political movements as well, are simply linked to the number of people that are there. What stage of the life cycle are they in? What do they care about, and so forth. And forecasting demographics is very, very easy in many countries. In something like Australia, a country that controls its own borders in terms of migration, is actually ridiculously easy. If I'm forecasting the Australian population 10, 15, 20 years into the future, will be spot on. If you
Right.
go to the US, where you have more porous borders, for example, that could go up and down, that is a bit harder to predict. If you look at something like Germany, which is, of course, in this construct of the EU, which is gigantic, but it has open borders within. So the population flows within are very, very difficult to predict, and they can't even be measured. We actually
Right.
don't know how many people live in Germany, for example. We have estimates, but we don't know.
And that's because the borders, because of the way their structure is, you could be living there but working in another country right next door.
Yeah, exactly. And you might
But
technically still be registered in your hometown in Munich,
yeah,
but you take a job in Amsterdam. Maybe you're registered there too, maybe not, but then the Statistical Office of Germany just counts you based on your registrations, and that has certain kind of problems. But roughly speaking, we know who's there. And of course, we now have theoretically access to technologies that would allow us to do population counts by proxy, like cell phones. We could
yeah,
easily measure how many cell phones log into a certain tower. You then multiply this. Based on this, you could actually, we do this already. You can draw commuting patterns and so forth. You can do cool stuff with this type of data. But that is, of course, more a specific use case. When we look at demographics from a business perspective, we start with the main questions of who will be there, how many people will be there, and where are they likely to move. That's of course property investors want to know this, but also if I'm a architect, if I'm a designer,
mhm,
I want to know, well, who's buying my stuff, who will be living in the dwellings that I design, not just now, but likely in 10, 20, 30 years. Can I already make design choices that matter? How do people want to interact with their housing? Because we know, for example, that there's so many people that want to live in their house forever. We
yes,
joke about this, that the main life for many people is to be carried out of their family home.
hmm,
And I guess that's what many people do. But then the needs, the use case, the interaction with this home changes dramatically
yeah.
because you move in maybe as a couple, maybe as a family
Like
of
maybe in your
one
20s
child.
or yeah,
Then you have several children. After this, you become an empty nester household. And flow, lots of things flow on from this, how and they become old. And so you go, well, what kind of design decisions can we make that you could actually live in this house for as long as possible? Um, should we generally widen bathroom doors? Should we build accessibility to a certain degree? Not that it actually inhabits the design of the dwelling for people who don't need it just yet, but do we design bathrooms that are super easy to plonk into an accessible bathroom with a couple of minor modifications that you can do yourself? For example. So that's the type of longitudinal thinking that
Yep.
might be needed, to be honest, mostly for the upper end of the market, because at the bottom end of the market, it's very hard to build property that is affordable to begin with. So all the niceties of making, it use in the longer term cheaper or easier
Mm.
might be difficult to pull
Well,
off.
yes and no. Like we've got the National Construction Code in Australia, which just told us that we'd make hallways wider and we'd make, bathrooms. It's at least one bathroom accessible for, disabled and or semi-disabled. And then, there's sort of some living standards that are set, but they actually put that through legislation just a year or so ago. And with that, I mean, I'm not sure for America how it's state run versus nationally run. But it's funny how I always think of this with, housing. Years ago, if I'd said to you, do you want a swimming pool? And you'd said to me, yeah, I want a rectangular one. Let's just say 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And I would have said, well, that's going to be the most expensive swimming pool you can get right now. And you'd be like, well, why is that? And I go, well, the one shaped like a kidney bean is going to be the cheaper one. Now the tables have turned because we've made so many rectangular ones. If you say, I want one like a kidney bean, ooh, that's going to be expensive. It's what people get used to and what everybody can kind of do, as opposed to that free thinking piece of it. So I think that even things like that National Construction Code with that, you know what, everybody screams and shouts for a little bit, and then it becomes, why wouldn't we do it? And yes, the compromise is always there, but they'll take the
You
quality
think
out of
about
something
the
else.
main argument against a particular building argument. It's like the building code is that thick. How could we possibly do this all? And so forth. This is over regulation. I get it. To a degree, it is, but to a degree, it also makes sure that we actually build dwellings that are usable, that are not harmful to the occupants. And I think in design practice, we talk about those fun buzzwords of AI and
Yeah.
automation, whatever. I think it's very, very thinkable that you draw your plans the way you want them to be, and then you just say, "Yo, dear architecture AI thing, just make it compliant
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
as little changes as required." And then you go, "Okay, I still don't like what you've done here," and you interact a bit more with the AI to end up with the final drawings, or thereabouts. So I think this is where compliance should become much easier if you utilize technology in. No, I don't think it's out there just yet, these kind of tools
Not
that
quite.
draw, but why shouldn't it be out there pretty soon? Because that would significantly make things simpler. And also, if you think about the regulatory burden from government, they need to sign off on certain buildings. If essentially you just run your digital check over it, you would have your buildings approved in a minute and a half.
Oh, look, I mean, in the design industry myself, obviously, there's the whole part of the community that's worried about what will it mean for their jobs, and we'll come to this kind of job thing along the way. But what will it mean for their jobs? And on the other side of it, I go, oh, what a relief when it can read the code, interpret the local code, look at the number of challenges there's been to the local code, make the decisions on based on those outcomes. So it's got its precedent, and it says, you've got an 80% chance of getting this, you've got a 90% chance of getting this when you do want to break the rules. Can you imagine how quick? And then, as you say, it can take part of what you're thinking and just reform that, but it reforms it so quickly. It's like and it will give you options that you go that I'll give you the example. So this morning I've been drawing a renovation on a house, and I've got 5 different outcomes which we're adding a main bedroom suite and a studio and just reconfiguring some other rooms. I've got 5 already of my own here that I've worked out, and that's taken me, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 hours to just rough those out. But they will all work. They will have some ups and downs. But that whole thing, just like you're saying, if I could have, if I put all 5 of them into the computer now and said to, an advanced AI program, just look at my pencil sketches, take that, would you, make sure it's compliant in this neighborhood. Now show me what I'm likely to get away with if I want to break compliance, and give me my options, please. It would
Yeah,
take
and again,
me
you
minutes,
see that these kind of technologies would ultimately allow you to squeeze more time out of your day. To be
Yeah.
honest, this kind of time that technology will free us up with, this will not be given to you to swim in your non-compliant swimming pool at home or anything like this. This will actually be used to work in different work tasks, because we hinted at it before, the ultimate demographic truism that the world faces and most advanced economies face already is the aging of the workforce. It is the prolonged skills shortage.
I've got that as one of my questions for you. So let's jump into that. We've got baby boomers disappearing. We've got thousands and thousands of small business. We'll call it small, but certainly under 100 million turnover, probably under 70 million turnover, and then down under 10 million turnover, sort of those zones.
Yep.
So what's relatively small business, non-corporate? We've got baby boomers retiring. A lot of those businesses won't even get sold. A lot of them just be closed.
Yep.
Then we've got younger people with the ability to take on those businesses, and a lot of them will be financed in by owners as well, because that'll be a way of that they can unlock some money out. And so then tell me from obviously it's happening everywhere in the Western world. I don't know whether it's happening in the Eastern world, but give me the run on that.
Yeah, so demographically speaking, the big thing that happens is that you, after the end of the Second World War, had this gigantic baby boom generation. After decades of, well, we had the First World War, we had the Great Depression, we had the Second World War, all those things occurred before the end of the Second World War. Pessimism, absolute pessimism. The Second World War ends and we create this incredible sense of optimism. We create a gigantic birth cohort. Depending on which country you look at, we had about 3.5 to 4 kids per woman. Big birth cohort.
I love that. Are you even allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Per woman. I love it.
That's the technical term.
That's the technical term, yeah. So three and a half kids per woman over a certain age, yeah?
Yeah, it's live births is the measurement. So let's call it roughly 4 live births per woman. So you have this big cohort of kids. They build a gigantic cohort, baby boomers. By their sheer heft, they are changing every stage of the life cycle they ever touched. They come into a world where they are, from the get-go, the biggest generation. They break boundaries left, right, and center. When they come of age, Beatles, Rolling Stones, sexual revolution, boom, 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 everything changes. Peace marches around the world. But
burning bras.
Exactly. So you do change social norms left, right, and center because you can, because you're so powerful. But boomers were actually meant to become a poor generation because there are so many of them competing for relatively few jobs, which creates negative wage pressure, meaning boomers were meant to have not all that much income. But they had one ace up their sleeve as a generation that every country only gets to play once. And we've seen this in all Western developed economies. Baby boomers threw women at the workforce at scale. We went, roughly speaking, it's again different from country to country, from 1 household income to 1.5 household incomes, because women were granted the right to work. And so all of a sudden, households are actually financially better off. Much less spare time, but so much more money. So boomers actually turn into this super wealthy generation. They are also so big and so powerful that they can shape policy in a way that favors their interests. And when boomers became of baby making age, so this is the early 20s in their particular case, they usually in the US, in Canada, in Australia, lived in the inner city.
Yeah.
close to the job center, close to universities. And they then started making babies. That means their apartments become a bit cramped. That means they need to move to a bigger dwelling. And at the same time, we just introduced the car to the masses. So it's the
Right.
first generation that at scale gets a car. And so boomers buy a car, they pack up their humble belongings, and they drive with their small family of just one kid, they drive to the suburbs. They develop suburbia. In this new suburban, in Australia, they were called the quarter acre blocks. Near you settle. The next family does the same thing, but they drive 10 meters further. The next family, another 10 meters. And so in these countries, not Europe, because Europe was established much before that, they were already built up, but in Canada, US, New
Yes.
Zealand, Australia, we created suburbia. And
Hmm.
then we continued urban sprawl like crazy. And this
Yeah.
was just demographic in nature as well, the sprawl. And of course, aided by the technology of boomers. And because we continued the sprawl, the early boomers lived in houses on a relatively large block of land that then turned out to be comparatively close to the city center, which made it very, very valuable. And so, as we continued to grow our cities this way, and the boomers just kept holding on to their property, that thing went up in price like crazy, and they became an ever richer generation. So that's cool. And we're talking about the skills shortage, though. So what
Yeah.
is happening now over the next 10 years? We push the entire generation of baby boomers out of the workforce. They all vacate their jobs, so they leave a big hole behind. Traditionally, we had, when one cohort retired, a bigger cohort entered the world of work at the other end of the spectrum, not with boomers, because they were so exceptionally big. When they vacate a place in the workforce, you have a smaller cohort entering. And you see that this is an imbalance. Big cohort out, small cohort in. But as if this wasn't bad enough, the boomers, particularly in the US, also in Australia, but particularly in the US, the boomers made a lot of kids themselves. They were called the
Yeah.
millennial generation.
Yeah.
And in the US and Australia, for example, we took in lots of migrants in the millennial age group as well. So we now have a big cohort of millennials. They are actually the biggest cohort in both countries. And they are going to continue for the next 12 years or so to make babies. That means they go on parental leave. They leave the world of work at least temporarily. So just staffing your economy will be incredibly difficult. And what we're seeing at the moment, for example, is a couple of economists still being confused about a certain development that happened over the last couple of years, where we increased interest rates to slow inflation that was driven from the pandemic and whatever. So you have a time of high inflation. That you counter this with high interest rates because this actually means that you spend less money. That is deflationary in
Well,
nature.
the banks collect the other money.
Well,
Yeah.
that too. And so, but so you have this high interest rate environment, and then you go, well, what do you do as a with this? Sorry, now I lost my train of thought.
Sorry. What do you do with you've got your high interest rates, you've got your people that have less to do because they're spending less.
Exactly. So we are in an environment where we lose workers. We
Hmm.
also have high interest rates. That
Hmm.
meaning hiring people. These people want more wages, so it's everything is super freaking expensive. Hiring your staff super expensive. There is no staff, so the existing workers can charge more money, and this is not going to change for the next 10 years. So the
So,
next decade, whoever you are as a business, you'll run out of workers. Money will become more expensive on average because what happens in the next decade is that the biggest generation, millennials, are pushed in the highest spending phase of the life cycle, the mid 40s. They spend every dollar that they have. Boomers, as they retire, they are not turning into poor penny pinching pensioners. Far from it. We know from Australian data that actually, US data shows the same. Boomers spend more money in every single category that we measure, except one that's charitable giving that declines. But usually, so you're in this environment where everybody spends money. So you know that you need to counter this kind of development as a central bank, as a reserve bank, with high interest rates to slow down the consumption. And all the while this is happening, economists go, yeah, usually this creates high unemployment. And they're
Right.
confused that it hasn't. We are still on record, relatively record low unemployment. And the idea there is that's simply demographic in nature. We just don't have enough humans to actually
Yeah.
lose their jobs. And all of this happens under these discussions around AI, robotics, automation, those fun buzzwords. And these will not lead to hordes of unemployed people because fundamentally we keep running out of workers in
People.
our
We're, we're,
countries.
we're short on people.
Exactly.
Mm. That's so that's pretty fascinating, really. I mean, obviously it is, but because we've got a shortage of people, we've got a shortage of workers, we've got a shortage of skilled workers, we've also got the likes of AI and robotics that will replace that the hole. They'll start filling the hole,
Yeah.
not just they won't be replacing people's jobs necessarily, but back when I was a kid, you could probably you would have thought that you could have chosen a job for life or a career for life. And then nowadays, really, very few people have got any idea. Like I look at my kids, you've got kids, your kids, who knows what they'll ever end up doing. And then my kids, I've got one at 22 and one at 14. And, they've both of them are facing probably the biggest revolution that we will see in our lives, but maybe not in theirs. They're just at the start of it.
Yeah, so I'm not sure to be honest about this. If you look about so one of the big risks in forecasting is that we overemphasize the rate of change. So we quite often hear this that we are in the fastest moving change. We've never seen that much change in our time in history. And I think probably that's not true. All that we're seeing is fast technological advance. We're not at the moment majorly overdoing the way that we live. If you think back, I'm tasked
Yeah.
with 2025 tasked with lots of reports or presentations. They're like, tell us what Australia looks like in 2040 or 14 years into the future, 25 years into the future. And then I'd always start with stepping back first, showing people when you think about the future, let's look back roughly the same amount of time ago. What did the world look like then? 25 years ago, the year 2000, you were definitely online and you had a phone. It was a
Yep.
crappy Nokia phone, but you had a phone. So you could take calls wherever you went. Yes, it was more expensive, but you already had the internet. You communicated online. You did your first online shopping potentially if you were upfront there. But so you still went to an office and you work. You know, yes, things change obviously, but the rate of change we overemphasize. Look back 100 years.
Yeah.
We had electricity. You didn't have the internet, but so more change then. But if you're only forecasting a career ahead for your 20-year-old, they'll work for 50 years. So you go, it's not that much. No, that's
Yeah.
the
Right.
that's the that's the mid 70s. So yeah, there's a lot of change, but we are ready to deal with this change. We've dealt with this change. And we're not talking about stuff where at scale the advance of electricity would have been much more intense. The introduction of the automobile would have been much more intense than what we're seeing at the moment. So yes, you'll definitely need to change, but don't think that it's unprecedented.
Yeah.
In this particular form, it has, but ultimately, we as humans have proven often enough that we are well and truly capable of adjusting to the new normals, so to speak.
I agree with that. Like I can look back in my life and go just simply, I remember the internet arriving. I remember New Zealand changing from pounds to dollars and just that happening, and that was this sort of a disruption in the country as to what would happen and how it would happen. And then, yeah, when go back to phones, phones. I remember phones that you were plugged to the wall and you couldn't move them. I remember phones that became, one that you could walk around the house and it was on a radio signal. And then from that, we got to mobile phones, which came in cases and then ended up in like bricks and then ended up with what we've got now. Or maybe you talk through your watch. All that technology is just a refinement of the technology of the things that have happened.
Exactly. And so I'd say, well, we talk about the different types of jobs that are out there. Um, will the profession of nursing look different in 20 years' time? Hopefully. Hopefully, we're smart enough to completely revolutionize. But you will have nurses, you'll have
Yes.
doctors, you will have people that fix your car in one way or another. Will this car be electric? Will it be self-driving?
Will it be
That
hydrogen?
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of these things, yes, they do make a difference, but ultimately, how the car changes your day-to-day life is not that important whether it's electric or petrol driven. If you look at your individual perspective, what would change it is if it was self-driving, because
Yes.
then you would have more time to do another thing if you wanted, or maybe we would sleep more, or maybe we would drink more alcohol because there's no drunk driving anymore, whatever it is. But so that would change behavior in some way or form because there's a fundamental shift. It would be even bigger of a shift. We talk about design and architecture and infrastructure. The change would be even bigger if cars wouldn't be universally owned anymore. If only
Yes.
a couple of tradies who needs a lot of tools in the back, they have cars that they own, but that's this very unique thing, and everyone else just calls a self-driving vehicle of the particular type and size that they need, and they then get driven around because this way you get away with about probably 20% of the existing vehicle fleet to service everyone. There's plenty of data that says at no given point ever are more than 10% of vehicles driving at the same time. That has never occurred. More than
Right.
90% are always parked. And so you go, yeah, sure. If it was all managed, let's say 20% of vehicles of the current stock would actually service it. That's cool. You would have so much more space in a city. You know, get rid
Would
of.
our infrastructure, like you think of this, I live in the Sunshine Coast, so holiday spot, a lot of tourism. And when Christmas is the school holidays start, I go, what used to take me 12 minutes takes me 20 minutes. This is crap. Like I
Yeah.
don't mind them all coming and all the rest because I'm probably in my car less than the 10% of time, like you said. And so, but I go, oh, far out. I can't just leave and get there anymore. Too many more people on the roads. If we got 20% of cars on the roads and they were self-driven, what would
Well, so
happen?
the real interesting thing is that the cars, you probably, if you just look at the traffic flows, you look at the cars that are moving, this wouldn't change all that much because people still have the same preferences. But you get rid of the cars that are parked. So all of a sudden, you can completely minimize the number of car parks. And so therefore, you could utilize land that you need in very attractive destinations to park a car. But is this of interest? The urban planners, the architects say, yes,
Mm.
please give it to me. We'll do really cool stuff with it. Ultimately, mankind will be better off if we do it this way. Nice. But if I'm looking at the car industry, would they be even interested in such a move? Maybe an Uber is because that's what they're betting on, that they become the platform to manage traffic or population flow or traffic flows. But would a Toyota, would a Tesla, Mercedes be interested in this? Remains to be seen if they find a business model or not. If we dictate these kind of developments on companies, who knows? But so this would be big fat strategic shift. Is
Yeah.
your car a cool electric modern vehicle or an old rundown diesel thing? Yes, emissions and so forth matter, but ultimately for the individual human that drives it, it's the same utility that you're fulfilling.
Yeah, yeah, it's still taking you from A to B to create the journey. Yeah, and taking you where you need to be. I always think of that thing of like when we go to the beach. When I say we, I mean the whole family. I'm like, if somebody sent an electric car, it'd have to be parked outside for half an hour while we filled it with shit that we could take to the beach. And then when we came back, we'd probably have to vacuum it for all the sand and crap that we'd bring back from the beach. There'd be a
Yeah, but
cleaning fee.
again, you think about those things, technical solutions, then you just call this a transport vehicle or whatever. Yeah, think about it. If you did this in your, SUV
Yeah,
or sedan or whatever, yes, that's messy. But if you were just to throw this at the back of a ute, of a truck for the American listeners, then that's no problem whatsoever. So these are just, in a sense, small technical solutions that come to niche problems. But all of this, most trips are super short trips, under a mile or two, people driving to a
yeah.
supermarket, dropping a kid off the school or something. We
Mm.
could automate a lot of this theoretically. But again, my job is forecasting rather than driving the technology. And then you go, how much will this change the world? And how much of this do we allow as a country to happen? And how much do we not allow this? to happen. We allowed the internet to become very, very omnipresent. That's very cool. But then when you forecast those big trends, you want to remember a couple of basic mantras. My favorite one being regulation follows innovation. So every technology ever always gets this first crazy Wild West phase where there is no regulation. You let a technology run wild. Airbnb, that's
Yeah.
an innovation. You are allowed to rent spare bedrooms, whole apartments to whoever the hell you want through a platform. That's good fun. Then we realize, oh, maybe we need to tax this. So all of a sudden you come with tax regulation. Then we realize, oh, wait a second, all of a sudden whole suburbs are being turned into Airbnbs and particular tourism destinations. Maybe we don't want this. We just lost a big urban planning tool, meaning where we direct tourism flows. That is gone now. So we are now regulating this across the world. But it took us a decade and a half.
Yeah.
And so every now and then this honeymoon Wild West phase is longer than it is elsewhere. But so we're now seeing this in social media phenomenon that started at scale 15 to 18 years ago. And so we're now realizing that in certain aspects for certain cohorts, we're talking largely about young people, and the social media is god awful. We only have negative mental health aspects that are being measured in depending on how you look at it. You go like, okay, how do we regulate this? And we are now in this phase. And at the moment, of course, when in European Union, when for a little while the American government tries to regulate this, they fight back, and there's a back and forth. But sooner or later, we'll arrive at some sort of level of regulation. And you know that those trends are occurring. And that's
Yes.
fun in forecasting. You know that sooner or later you see this cool innovation. Everybody goes like, yo, imagine this thing. This is completely changing everything. Cryptocurrency is changing absolutely everything. We're still in the Wild West phase of this. Some people would say, yes, there is regulation already happening, but I'd say this is not real regulation just yet.
This
Yeah.
is just a few rules thrown around the edges as we find out what people do.
That's exactly it. And so you know that regulation catches up eventually.
And
But
then
of course,
that's why you innovate again. You know, that old thing, you learn the rules, you learn how to break them and then innovate again.
look at tobacco.
Yeah.
So in
Yeah.
Australia, we ran one of the most successful anti-smoking campaigns of the world. Super, super low smoking rates. We know the playbook. We managed to get rid of smoking amongst young people almost completely. Marvelous success. Along comes the innovation of the now regulated tobacco industry, which happens to be vapes. And they run a simple argument: it's much healthier than smoking, whatever. Yeah. And so go innovation, you only target the young people that are non-smokers with certain strategies, big success. What will happen? Will everyone vape, or will we continue the anti-smoking playbook on the vaping? Because vaping is god awful. Don't vape. Legal
Yeah.
asterisks here. Yeah. And so regulation will tighten. And again, this game continues wherever you look.
Yeah. Yeah. I worked in innovation for a few years, actually in Germany a lot with companies like Airbus and, you know, those kind of companies, Bombardier and stuff. And the thing is that you were always, whatever it was, whatever the norm was, you'd be challenging it and you'd always be looking for a way to do it better and sometimes cheaper or more profitably. And, you know, like there's always this outcome that you're looking to change the status quo of what we have to get a better outcome for the people who will use it.
And that's the drive of a free market
Yeah.
to begin with. A good government is meant to do this left, right, and center. We want to create an environment where all those forces push toward that we ensure that we make the world better. And the world doesn't need to make sure that we create peace on Earth or nonstop or something like this. It's just like if your little product becomes a bit more user friendly, a bit cheaper, a bit longer lasting, a bit more environmentally friendly, whatever it is, this is the same drive. It's the
Yeah.
constant drive to improvement. And I think this is largely a systemic thing. So we've seen this, of course, you know, if you look at the big picture historical narratives of a centralized economy, wherever it was, the drive for permanent improvement falls away. Yeah, so the
Right.
communist
Yeah.
technologies did not continue to improve constantly.
And that's because you just don't have enough free market economy that, and you've got so much regulation that's so controlled that there's no opportunity and there's no drive to do it because you can't get any more for yourself individually. One of the things around housing that and cars that kind of fascinates me. You look at the ability of where people live and or the want of where they live and what they gravitate to, whether it's beaches or whether it's mountains or forests or cities or whatever. And then cars the same, like one of the things that I see lots with my clients is their home and their cars tend to be, not always, but often, part of their alter ego. This is very egotistically driven as to how they see themselves and they want others to see them. How do you see that shift?
Well, we're constantly trying to send messages to the world around who we are. And traditionally speaking, the car has been one of those things. And it's a thing that you're being seen and you arrive in it. It's in a sense your introduction. If you drive to a workplace, this is your car. If you drive around town to see your friends, that's the big source of wealth that you bring along to your friends that you can show off. So yeah, there's a certain kind of almost like a business card aspect towards that. The house is what you welcome people into, so you have a story to tell about this. And ultimately, this falls all into the big category of we try to tell stories about ourselves to ourselves and to the external world through our consumption, through what we consume, what we say on social media. We photograph our lunch, we photograph what we do online, we show a certain car, we have a house look a certain way. It's all pretty cliche in a sense. And of course, the psychologists would tell you, you're very much reliant on external validation here by constantly valuing these things. But you go, well, even if you go the complete counterculture route and you become a punk or you become whatever it is, then you still follow a certain kind of dress code. You just have a very specific niche that you signal to
Yeah.
because these are your people that you decide are important to signal to. So whatever you do, even if you completely disregard the norm, you're still adhering to some sort of norm. It's just a different norm that you set your sights on. And of course, you want to attract as many friends or social media likes or romantic partners as depending on who you are
Yeah.
with signaling. And yeah,
So
cars, homes fall into that.
yeah, this signaling, as you say, which when you're looking at demographics, obviously this has an effect over people's behavior. How do you, these are going to be some really rudimentary questions because I haven't really thought it through very well, but we're all tribal in some sense, we all have our signatures or our signaling devices. And with that, it makes people, fit into a category. It's like me wearing my hat. It's a very definite signaling device that I chose to do. It
Yeah.
wasn't because I'm going to get sunburnt in my office. It isn't because I'm really going to get sunburned outside because I don't go outside in the middle of the day. Um, it's a definite signaling device.
Yeah.
And with that, when you're looking at demographics of things, how do you see that overlaying major trends, or does it just create, does it spark off sort of innovative trends? Does it
Yeah.
that changes society?
I think the real interesting field of work to tap into there is the generational research, because we have such clear understanding that, of course, you and I, we are all individuals. You always interact with another person who is an individual as well. But overwhelmingly, we know that whatever happens to you and your environment during your formative years, so it's roughly 13 to early 20s, this changes a generation forever. And so therefore, we end up with clear differences in generational values based on the circumstances under which this particular generation grew up. And the hilarious thing is that what shapes us in the formative years shapes our outlook on life forever. And that
Whatever.
doesn't
Yeah.
go away. And so it really matters how, well, the socioeconomic environment, the
Yeah.
technological environment, the political environment, the broader climate uh, uh, in which you grow up,
Mm.
that changes you forever. And so you have the Cold War kids, Gen Z, Gen X's at the moment as well. The Cold War is part of ingrained in their thinking, and that then shapes the worldview. Consequently, that's a starting point there. Boomers, of course, have the same as the first generation to experience free music that was unrestrained. This was an expression of this. So all of this is happening. Every generation has their things. And of course, you say, well, but older and younger people also live through the same thing. It's true. You and I, we were impacted by the pandemic, but we weren't
Yes.
shaped by it. Kids that were
Yes.
in school, that were maybe in the early stages of university, they were permanently shaped by the pandemic. That will be part of the way that they view the world. We were just annoyed by it.
I
We were,
think I was about to say, I know I was shaped by it, even though I wasn't like for the rest of my view of the world, but it certainly put a few markers in. That was homeschooling. That was almost the end of me. The things I really enjoyed about the pandemic, that was certainly not high on the list at all. I was like, to hell with it. If they learn nothing, they learn nothing. Just keep enough peace in my house. And another thing that the pandemic did that really shifted housing was, our houses truly weren't designed to have two kids or three kids or whatever it is, and a husband and wife or a couple of any kind at home in them
yeah.
7 days a week.
Such an intellectually speaking, interesting experiment what we've done, because what we've done during the pandemic, we pulled a lot of activities that we used to do in third spaces into the home. You
Mhm.
exercise at home, you work at home, you entertain your kids at home. So all of a sudden, the house needed to be bigger. You need a
More
study.
space.
You
Yeah.
need cars were moved out of the garage and we utilized the garage in a different way. So all of these things just occurred as a reaction to a big event, and some of those behaviors stick. And of course, if you look at from an urban planning perspective, what the pandemic has done, and I'll correct the narrative in a little while, but most cities look like a fried egg. We
Yeah.
have big
Yeah.
fat jobs clustered in the egg yolk. This is the
Hmm.
juicy jobs are in the egg yolk. And then in order to avoid the soul destroying commute, we move as close as possible to the egg yolk. And so the rich people live close to the egg yolk. The poor people live at the outskirts of town. Roughly speaking, looks like a fried egg. But then after a couple of months of pandemic, people realized, wait a second, I'm paying a premium to live close to the office tower that I'm not going to. That is stupid. How about I sell up, finish the lease and move to the outskirts of town, maybe even a regional location where I get more bang for my buck.
Mm.
Quite alive,
Massive.
whatever. But then, why am I still talking about this? Because this is the pandemic. It's over for all intents and purposes. So this exact pattern of taking people from the inner suburbs and throwing them to the outer suburbs, that would occur even without the pandemic. Because it's simply millennials making babies. The millennial generation overwhelmingly still lives partnered up near the inner city. And as they create their 1.5 kids per household, the hipster apartment becomes cramped, and you need to find a bigger place. You need to find a 4 bedroom place. These are not available in the inner city. Millennials couldn't do what their baby boomer parents have done and move to the middle suburbs because their baby boomer parents are still
Still
hogging
there.
the 3 and 4 bedroom dwellings as empty nesters. They're also fantastic NIMBYs, meaning they block development in those middle suburbs. So we push the whole millennial generation over the next decade from the center of town to the urban fringe. And we realize, though, that why aren't people moving to the hinterland, to the outskirts of town, to the outback? Well, because we did not end up working remotely. We ended up working in a hybrid fashion at scale. And this is then where ridiculous human psychology kicks in. It's like the less often we need to go to the office, the more willing we are to do a longer commute. But we are not willing to commute for more than 2 hours, no matter what,
Oh,
no matter how
really?
often we go. Yeah. So if you draw a 2 hour drive time radius around any CBD in
Hmm.
Australia, inside of the CBD, it is population boomtown. Growth, growth, growth. Outside of the 2 hour drive time radius, it is crickets. No one
Wow.
moves there.
Same for the US.
Yes, yeah, I'm not exactly sure about the time, but the same pattern occurs.
Same.
And the idea then is to go, well, surely there are towns outside of the 2 hour drive time radius that do well. It's like, yes, there are, but some towns are shrinking and some are thriving. A thriving town outside of the 2-hour drive time radius must offer four things to succeed. Um, the first one is affordable and available housing. Makes sense. You don't uproot your family and move to a place if housing isn't available or affordable.
Yep.
You then need to have jobs on offer because within the 2-hour drive time radius, people bring their own jobs. They keep the inner city job and move to the outskirts of town. Outside of the 2-hour radius, you better provide jobs. You then need to provide healthcare, which quite often is an issue that you don't have enough decent healthcare clinics or whatever on offer, and you need to provide schooling or childcare depending on the age that you need it.
Those are the four factors.
Yeah, and if you have those four, you're booming. If you lack one of them, you're not booming. It's just that simple.
So those little regional towns that experience some growth and have some charm, if they're coming to you, you would be saying, well, these are the things. When you say jobs, could that
You
be
need to have a job
solved?
on offer because people move there and they need to eat. They need to pay the bills. So you need to offer jobs. That means not you as a town, as the local government area or something, but you must have businesses in town that know that I can pay you money. Maybe if you're an inner city banker, your financial job in a little town, your accounting job, whatever it is, will pay less money. But if housing is significantly cheaper than it is in the inner city, then you still are left with more money. And so that is a good deal then for you. But of course, people do kind of sort of make those equations when they look for jobs, when they think about moving or uprooting. And they then don't do this if your town doesn't have this on offer. Every now and then, towns think that they're not shrinking and they think that they're doing reasonably well, but they're just a sponge city. So what we see sometimes in regional cities is that all of the growth that occurs is from the absolute rural population aging like crazy and then leaving their rural settlement because they do need some sort of minimal level of medical care and they can't find this in the rural destination and they therefore need to move to the regional hub city. So that occurs all across Australia, occurs in the small rural locations in the US as well, a sponge city effect. So that then looks that the total number of people is stable, but you constantly lose young people and you only grow old people. That's sponge city effect that can be negative for the economy of a city.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, something that I recognize also in a lot of my clients is I think 90 something percent of my clients are entrepreneurs or they have their own business. And if not, they're retirees and baby boomers going, yeah, let's throw the money at that project or whatever. They
Yeah.
know where their investments are. They know where their income comes from. They're either early retired or they're retirement age, and they're saying, yeah, well, we want this stuff now. I think the biggest thing that I see, I'd be really interested in a comment on this, would be you start out like you've got two young kids, and then, that grows a bit. Next thing you need a bit more space and you move your home, and then you've got a bit more money as well, and so you maybe choose somewhere that's more desirable for you, whether that's in a city or whether it's or near to city or whether it's out at a beach suburb or something like this, wherever there's jobs and schooling, obviously. And then you build this bigger place, and when you build this bigger place, it's designed to house your family for, I don't know how many of a years, let's say 10 to 12,
Yeah.
because then the kids are going to leave home, they're going to go to university, or they're going to leave permanently with a partner and go somewhere else. And now you've got this big house that was designed for that growth of the family. And then there seems to be, and this may not be running with the right figures, but as that has happened, there's this thing, well, could our house just be designed so really it's just us as a couple and we can lock up the other part of it, because we want them to come here on Christmas and Easter, and we want them to come for all these holidays. We want to be able to accommodate our whole family here because we don't want to go and sleep at their houses.
So and this is where you have all those different considerations for how you utilize a home. And usually what we've done where homes were still affordable enough is you just live in it and you don't use bedrooms. They
Yeah.
just sit there.
Mm-hmm.
It's inefficient use of wealth. And we're of course not in Australia, at least. That's okay because you bought your home, it's yours. You pay a couple of council rates to have the garbage collected, and that's about it. But the downsizing argument would be much stronger if all of a sudden you were charged a land tax, because then you go, yeah, I'm paying this tax for this big plot of land that I'm on, and I don't need it. I don't utilize it. It would then more people would downsize. We're not incentivizing downsizing in Australia. You're always free to do whatever you want. Yeah, but how much do we want to encourage people to
Yeah.
downsize? How much do we want to nudge people to downsize? So these are big questions because they're not just theoretical. These are questions you're really impacting people's lives, but you also massively, theoretically, would free up family dwellings for families.
Yeah.
Because they are near a school infrastructure in more commutable distance. Why would a retiree need to live in a suburb that is very much in the commuting belt? That's not needed. Well, why would they live there? Because they want to live there and because they have their social network established there and so forth.
That was my
Um,
next one. They're going to have community, which is their social network
yeah.
and familiarity.
And you then have the idea that if you look at the type of accommodation available in a specific suburb, usually it's pretty uniform. A family suburb has family-sized housing.
Mhm.
If I want to downsize and I want to retain my social network, my whatever, I'd say, yeah, maybe I can sell the 4-bedroom house and I move into a nice 2 or 3 bedroom apartment.
Or
But they're
townhouse
not
or
available locally. So I either go, yeah, I completely uproot and move to the Sunshine Coast to
it's a
retire
beautiful spot.
in a lovely destination, or I go, well, I just don't do it.
Yeah.
It's
Just
just stay in the family home. And this is where we have lots and lots of wonderful data. This is Australian data because, dear Americans, we run a census that is orders of multitude better than yours. We run probably the best census in the world because we run a census every 5 years in Australia.
yeah.
You run in the US, you run one every 10 years. In the US, you ask 16 questions. We ask 65. So
Wow.
the amount of cross-tabulation, the amount of information that we can get out of Australia is insane. And recently we have asked one new question that said, do you have a medically diagnosed, not self-diagnosed, medically diagnosed chronic health condition? And you got to pick your favorite health condition. And one of the health conditions was mental health. Do you have a medically diagnosed mental health condition? So therefore, we can see all those different things. We can see what kind of geographical factors negatively or positively impact mental health if we correct for other factors. Absolutely awesome stuff that we can do. And if you look at the life cycle of mental health, you start up with a teenage angst, god awful mental health. Your
hmm
mental health gets better. You say things like, my partner drives me crazy, but ultimately they make your mental health better. Then you say stuff like, my kids drive me crazy. Ultimately, they improve your mental health. Then again, your kids improve your mental health by another massive step once they leave the house.
Yeah.
And then once you retire, your mental health gets better yet. And then just after retirement, your mental health starts declining because more and more of your friends die, your partner dies, and when your partner dies, your mental health actually gets a real kick in the guts. But your mental health absolutely plummets once your partner dies if you find yourself in a car-dependent suburb. And I find that utterly interesting. Because what that means is it speaks to the importance of networks, of
Yeah.
social interactions. Because in a car-dependent suburb, as you get older, you get out less and less. You drive less frequently. Your
hmm
friends visit you less frequently. You have no interactions in walkable distance. So you just bit by bit get isolated. And that is god awful for your mental health. So if we talk about those baby boomer couples, empty nesters, if your family house is in a car dependent suburb, you probably should get out. You probably should ensure that both of you move in your early 70s, early to mid 70s, while you're both still active, still healthy. Yes, the joints hurt, but ultimately everything still works. And you move into a walkable neighborhood. From there on, you reestablish a social network. Ideally, this neighborhood isn't too far away from your existing social, points of importance, and you take it from there. That would be ideal. Maybe if you're a property investor in your 50s and 60s, you buy the property, your retirement property right now, and you only move into it at a set date.
Yeah.
where you become really clear about this. This would strategically being optimizing for your mental health. People, of course, don't see it this way. And people are ultimately stubborn and say, yeah, that they want to be carried out of the family house. But yeah, so far, the limited data that we have on it tells me that this is actually not a good idea.
It's pretty fascinating. As you were saying it, I'm thinking to myself, so I like to live on a hill and I like to have a view, and I have that privilege. And but I live on a hill that my kids don't want to walk up it. Like, and I go, so I know when I go, oh, I'm going to walk up there, I think, oh, yeah, really? Why would I do that? I would drive to another hill and climb it. That's another story. But actually, just if it was a daily thing, I'm like, oh, it's too hot. It's too steep. I've got an excuse for it all. That's why I own a car. But I can see that very
Of
much
course,
in my neighborhood.
immediately got a counter argument for
Yeah.
that as well is that staying physically active,
Hmm.
walking, cycling wherever you can, prolongs everything in a positive way in aging. Your mental, physical activity is much better. You're also more social if you do these
Yeah.
things. So this is a super crucial thing. A sedentary lifestyle is bad to begin with for on lots of measures, but in old age it gets terrible. And of course, you want to remain this active sense. Yeah,
Well, that catchword of now, which is health span as opposed to lifespan,
exactly.
is the big, phrase. It's like, how do you have this long lifespan
See,
with
with
health?
corrections by this, and this is where we make. So every now and then forecasting goes into the combines very hard, definitely correct demographic data, generational data with let's throw a bit of a crazy speculation on top. And so the hard social data is there is an absolute bucket load of boomers that are aging. Fact.
Hmm.
Nobody
Hmm.
can fight this. Historical fact, boomers changed every stage of the life cycle they ever lived through. Nobody can dispute this. So will they, baby boomers, change the way that they retire, that they live in old age, and will they change the way that they die? I would say that is a given.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then it's just about, okay, cool, but how do they change this? Then, okay, let's speculate. We know, for example, that boomers are obsessed with being in control of their life. They like being their own boss. They value the independence. It's one of the highest values of the generation. Okay, so
Independence
you
and
want
freedom.
independence and you want to be in control in death. So probably all those things that allow you a bit of say of when you die, they'll be popular. And this again goes two ways. This goes the extreme, bioengineering way where people don't want to die and they try to live forever. And it goes the way where people say, I want to not be under life prolonging experiences whatsoever. I want to make sure that this gets, ended quite quickly. And I want the right to be in charge of this. So I think that the boomers will completely revolutionize euthanasia, for better or worse. And I think, particularly if I look at the US, where I think it is, and don't quote me on the numbers just yet, but I'm pretty sure that something like 25 or 33%, not sure which, of your life medical spendings in the US occurs in your last 6 months of life. And they
Wow.
are only life prolonging, not life enhancing measures. And so you go, well, you could trim the fat there. Yeah, just purely financial.
Or your
You,
kids could for you.
yeah, yeah, but that's the idea. It's like boomers want to be in control. They will not hand over any kind of say to their kids in that measure whatsoever. So you go, well, I think that boomers will fight for the right to die when they want. And I think that the system will let them because
Yeah.
it is financially very lucrative to do so.
It's pretty fascinating that I know my dad's 96 and he has early onset. Well, nothing's early when you're 96, so
Yeah.
let's get that piece. But he has dementia, he doesn't know who I am. He can make a piece of conversation and stuff. And I remember him saying, years ago, I don't want to ever be a burden and I don't want to, ever
Yeah.
not be in control of all my mind and stuff. And that happened years ago that he was out of control of his mind. And yet he's still healthy. He still takes one pill a day. He puts some eye drops in. He doesn't do it. Somebody does it for him, but he showers himself. He washes himself. He does all those things, makes his own cup of tea. I don't think I'd let him use a stove or a microwave oven, but in general, he just takes up space. He can't really have an in-depth conversation. we can't have conversation as such. But
And
he
then
would have euthanized himself if he could see himself now. But he's quite happy living right now.
exactly. And so this is where all the moral quandrums are in,
Mm.
because if you make a decision about your future self, difficult, because we very much know that you still, even in old age, continue to develop. The actual mental peaks, of course, your mental computing capacities peaks at 18 or 19 or something like this. Yeah.
So we're all on the downhill slide already.
We are already, but certain peaks still occur. Happiness with your own body.
Yep.
Five. Yeah, for example, this is you've long been in physical decline by then, but ultimately you're still happy and grateful for all the spare parts that still work and so forth. But so it's hard. And I'm not saying that this is an
Mm.
easy ethical question to answer. I'm just trying to forecast. I'm going like, yeah, there will be massive change. And I think ultimately boomers will, for better or worse, not making ethical statement. I think they'll win the right to have more
Yeah.
control over their death.
Yeah, I think they will as well. I can't see why they wouldn't. Take me down a bit of a story with things like the US, and I said to you before we started, will the US reinvent itself as as an economic superpower? It is an economic superpower already, but will it reinvent itself?
Well, so the US is the best country in the world by a long shot, as the Americans will tell you any day. But only if you look at broader geopolitical and geographic factors. You get a fantastic land. Everything that you could ask was in the land. You get navigable rivers, you get access to both oceans. Yes, despite the narratives and current trade wars with Canada and Mexico, you have
Big
two
deal. Yeah.
easy peasy neighbors in there. You have integrated economies left, right, and center. They're all your friends. Nobody will ever invade your continent. You never had to fight a foreign power on since you've been a country. Insane. Wonderful setup. You somehow managed to become Silicon Valley. That could have been anywhere,
Mhm.
literally.
Mhm.
Somehow you snatched this up, and this is not going away. You are the best country. They're now trying to re-industrialize, meaning,
Mhm.
this is the
We lost your picture.
I'll say this again. Yeah.
It's
So the
okay.
US is now trying to reindustrialize, trying to get the manufacturing that was, pushed to Asia over the decades. They tried to get this back. America first. The idea is that you can reindustrialize because you have robots do the work on the cheap. You don't need to run an integrated, complex global economy. Yeah,
It's
the US is the number one superpower, will be the most important economic superpower, not because of lack of trying from other countries, but if you look at the next title contenders, they have major problems. China, formerly the biggest country of the world, now very much the second biggest country behind India. Um,
And why do they have such more complex issues?
well, so the idea is that the demographic setup of China couldn't be worse. You completely eroded any kind of hope of ever getting birth rates up again. Birth rates there sit at, depending on who you listen to, one birth per woman is the best estimate that you get. You have cities like Shanghai where each woman will have half a baby on average, and you
Wow.
need 2.1 babies to keep the population stable. So China is in permanent population
Decline.
decline. That is a given. They'll be half the size by the end of the century.
Wow. And what
So you
about
go.
India?
India has about 50, 60 years worth of population growth left in the tank, and probably 100 years worth of urbanization. So that is very much up and coming. China will be very much a regional power. When we talk about the halving of the Chinese population, depending on who you are as a foreign business doing business with China, that might not be of interest to you, to be honest. Because many businesses that sell to the Chinese market sell to what would be considered the global middle class. So the Chinese population that is rich enough to roughly consume on a global level, and that is 250 million or thereabouts. And so it is thinkable to continue to shrink the country while you increase the global middle class. Yeah, if you
Yeah,
just look
right.
at something like steel demand or iron ore demand, that might go down because the building will slow down. But
Mhm.
ultimately, if you sell handbags, cars to the Chinese
shoes. Yeah,
shoes. You'll be right.
yeah, yeah, right. As long as you're selling those kind of items, consumable items as opposed
Exactly.
to
So
infrastructure type
this is
items.
why you need to think about, who you are talking about,
Yeah.
from the business perspective. But yeah, so
And will
China
India
is saying
take up that slack and sell it to them?
yeah, so India at the moment isn't taking up all that much of the manufacturing, because there is cheaper manufacturing to be won elsewhere in Asia. And India has they really double down on highly educating the population. So you have absolutely marvelous STEM that's coming out of India, winning strategy, but the demographic profile of India just happens to have an absolute bucket load of millennials and younger people. And so you have an overeducated workforce, which is why the Indians are actually very, very happy for their highly educated people to leave the country and to study and then work in the migration nations of this world, your US, your Canada, your Australia,
Sure.
because otherwise you just create social unrest. If you
Yeah.
have a highly educated population that wants work to be, compensated adequately, and they then just have to do like, lower paid jobs, they're unhappy.
Hmm.
We're seeing
Hmm.
this at scale in India already. So that's a problem there. It's because in a sense you never overeducated on an ethical or intellectual level, but from a workforce perspective, you have too many highly skilled workers. You don't have enough jobs for them. You now want to have more low-skilled manufacturing workers who don't complain about their wages, and you didn't create enough of them. So there are a couple of challenges there, but ultimately, I'm super, super optimistic about India.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, it would seem it's got enough unstable kind of factions within the country and around the country, Pakistan and stuff where they don't all get on.
You have
A few religions.
it's never helpful for economy if you have too many geopolitical adventures secretly planned. That is destabilizing.
Mhm.
That is not good. And so both India and China have lists of territory that they would like, that they don't like,
Yeah.
and that creates instability.
Yeah. I get you. I get you. What do you think's going to happen with Putin? Because it seems
Ah,
to be a mess over there, and
Russia.
and and it will make a difference, won't it?
Yeah, sorry. I wrote a piece about the demographic perspective of the war in
Yeah.
Ukraine. And if I was Putin's demographic advisor, when I'd say, yo, Mr. Putin, I hear you want to take over
Vlad, you can call him Vlad. Yeah.
Vlad. Yeah, you want to take over a couple of those former Soviet states again. That is your big goal. You're touching 70. You are 70. You have limited time on this planet. Also, the demographic setup right now, yes, Russia is in terminal decline. But what we happen to have is about 20 years ago, we had a mini baby boom in Russia. So the number of 18 to 27-year-olds,
Hmm.
which happens to be Russian military conscription age, will be the biggest right now than it ever is, than it ever will be again. Right now is a good time to do this because we do know that historically speaking, the Russian military tactic always has a lot of a high churn rate, as we like to call it. They're very willing to throw people at the problem. And so that is your window of opportunity. Do it now. And so this is completely disregarding anything about tactics or military preparedness. But demographically speaking, this is the best time that you could possibly come up with. And if I had done the reading of the data in 2025, and you go like, yeah, you look at the forecast, yeah, 2025, mid 20s, early 20s of this century, something around then is the perfect time to do it.
If you're going to throw people in
If
wars
you
and
go, I need to burn. And to be honest, the idea was not to have a big war in Ukraine. The
yeah,
idea was to quickly take it over and have wars elsewhere. But you know that to take this over, you need to burn through 1 million people easily. And
yeah,
so that is part of the equation. All the while, because it's an oligarchy, this is a state that has disregarded its educational system. During the Soviet Union, they actually did produce engineers that kind of stopped. So you have a uneducated, unnecessarily uneducated cohort. So you'll
hmm,
never bring back high tech anything. That's quite problematic. So where do you go in Russia? What do you do? The decline, it's aging like crazy. Its population shrinkage is insane. Russia will never be a good country again. And if you are a young person in Russia, get the hell out. There is nothing for you. Your life will never be as good again as it was in 2019. Never. No chance.
Yeah, right.
Unless you have some sort of major disruption. And the major disruption is when we call you need to be a chaos player in geopolitics. You need to clear the poker table, throw away all the cards, and hope that you get handed a better hand of cards the next time. Um,
Wow.
there's nothing left. We see this. We have numbers matter because we don't know it, but we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of young Russians, the educated ones that were left leaving the country. They would be absolutely stupid if they
To
ever
not
set
leave.
foot into Russia again.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you are a migrant, Russia has been forcefully conscripting migrants. We're talking about the poorest of migrants that come from countries that are even poorer than Russia. There are not that many around in the neighborhood. They conscripted them. So if you're moving to Russia, you're absolutely stupid.
Yeah.
So there is no redeeming quality left there other than the chaos play.
Wow.
In,
Wow.
in my very pessimistic reading. And of course,
Mm.
now you see that because they're turning into a war economy, this is going to be super high inflation already because everyone is working in the economy. They're paying high wages for their soldiers because you need to incentivize people because they know that it's a risky job. That increases wages absolutely everywhere. The country is messed up. If Ukraine was theoretically able to keep fighting, which they can't because they also burn through lots of people at a
Hmm.
rate of, I think, 1 to 6. People, please correct me here, but I
I
think
don't
they're
know, but
burning
yeah.
around their churn rate, their burn rate, whatever you want to call it, is about a sixth of the Russians. And remember that the Russians lose around 1,500 personnel at the moment per day.
It just seems, yeah, unthinkable when you do it, but it's
And it seems
interesting to hear it
unnecessary.
as
To be
numbers.
honest,
Yeah.
just purely economically speaking, this is the dumbest thing. Putin will go down as the one of the dumbest people to have ever
Yeah.
led the country.
Yeah.
He views himself and is viewed as this tactical mastermind that played the Europeans, and he played them for a while by giving them gas and ensuring that
Hmm.
they get completely hooked on his
Hmm.
product. That would have been enough, but now he has the idea of getting the band back together. And of course, as a German-born person, I'm very much against the idea of having countries in Europe taken over. The whole idea is to create stability in the region. I
Absolutely.
don't buy any into the NATO destabilizing thing. This is a country that never had any hope there. They weren't integrated early enough
Mm.
into the system.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm super pessimistic. If you want to ask about a country that I'm pessimistic about, Russia definitely number one.
Tell me, England. It seems a mess. Brexit's
Yeah, it's
like
well.
taking its
So again,
bite now, and
without being too, let's answer it in a roundabout way. So it turned out that none of the positive things that were meant to happen during Brexit occurred.
yeah.
Life got more expensive. Skill shortage is there. You don't have nurses, medical, everything got worse. So I go, okay, maybe we just made the wrong call and we should correct it. Who cares about all of these questions? I'm like,
Yeah.
how did you decide to leave the European Union? You left it through a referendum. And I think referendums are dumb. I think referendums are anti-democratic. People always display them as being the ultimate sign of democracy because every voter gets a say. But the goal is not to give everybody a say.
Mm.
That is a dumb way. We're never giving everyone a say in any election. We let everyone vote. And what are they voting for? They are voting for a member of parliament, a person where you go like, yeah, it's like, you, dear Mr. Whatever, you represent us 100,000 people. We put our trust in you that you think in depth about the problems that are facing us. Please look at them from our perspective to make sure that we are better off. Catch you in 4 years when we elect you again.
Yep.
And instead, we ask every person. So we're actually dumbing down the quality of decision making. A
Hmm.
referendum, I don't care what is being asked in a referendum. I would always ask people to say no. Don't change anything ever, anywhere via a referendum. It guarantees that you make decisions in the dumbest way possible, where you ask everyone, and people do not answer the question. Yes, they tick yes or no, but
Yeah.
they answer, Do I hate the status quo? Do I hate the political elite? Do whatever. It's a terrible idea. Running a referendum, I hate it. That's my, this is the
I
personal brand.
like that. Yeah, well, I'm with you actually. I totally understand what you're saying with it, and I think about the referendum that they had in Australia about like
Giving the
gay
indigenous
home.
population a voice
Yeah,
in parliament. Do you want to have a gay marriage?
yeah.
Whatever. You run those referendums, and what does it ultimately tell me? It tells me it is a politician that is utterly gutless that is putting those things forward
We won't put
because they're
there.
not willing to fight it the hard way through parliament.
Yep. Yep. It's
Which
there.
is the way it's meant to do, because that is actually democratic. The other thing is populist. It is not democratic in nature. It does not optimize for the best decision-making process. It is a cheap way out. And yeah, uh, again, whenever I see a referendum is being announced,
I
it's always, and it's always divisive.
Yeah.
Always divides a country. It is
Yeah.
not a unifying thing, because also you don't run a referendum usually when you think it is going to be a home run, when you got like 99% are
No,
voting this way.
you
It's a
just
thing when you kind of think it's kind of close, but my side will win.
it's a bit when you're worried about your job. You go, well, I'll let the people decide overall on that subject because if I do it, I'll be screwed for sure. Either
Exactly.
way. Yeah.
It's therefore a gutless
Yeah.
way of doing it. So
Yeah.
I would always advise politicians to not do it. Just if this is something that you believe in, if the voice for parliament, if Brexit, whatever it is the thing that you want, then you stand up for it and you argue for it in
You
parliament.
yeah.
And then you have the how many hundreds of delegates there are, have them decide on what it is. That is a democratic process. The other thing is just risking to be, dumbing down the narrative, and you're not
100%.
doing justice to the complexity of the situation, which is always the path that you should go by whenever you make a decision, whenever you think about an issue. I always want you to ask, am I doing justice to the complexity of the situation? And if you answer yes, you need to slap yourself in the face, because you never will. You will
You
only ever come a bit closer to the complexity of the situation. But there are too many factors that feed into any kind of reasonably important decision for you to ever grasp. View it from as many perspectives as possible, yes, but ultimately, you know, uh,
ultimately you got to make a decision. A decision has to be made. And it's like the Brexit one. They made the decision. And as you said just before, we'll just reverse it. Go back to the European Union and
um,
get back on with the job. Like,
exactly. And this is where you go into individual things. I go, okay, I understand part of the argument of a
mm,
Brexit, and this has to do with a national identity,
mhm,
is that you're ultimately scared of losing an identity. And so, again, this is a principled narrative, is what we tend to do in any kind of major social movement is we tend to deconstruct. We tend to deconstruct the status quo for whatever it is, and we then try to reestablish, reconstruct
yeah.
the new status quo. But quite often those movements just deconstruct. And
Yeah,
then
that's
I find that
fascinating.
utterly uninspiring. If you just deconstruct the concept of anything that you want in gender, marriage, national
Education,
pride,
national, yep,
education, you're not
yep.
winning anything. It's a bit of a self-righteous argument to say the status quo is crap. The interesting thing comes in the phases afterwards, when we rebuild and try to reestablish something new. And in
Mm,
an ideal way, you did not kill the old way. In an ideal way, you integrated the old way and you built upon it. Because if you just destroy it, and usually the old thing has firm advocates or believers, they just hate it. And then you create this constant clash, that you create culture wars. That is not a wise way of changing a society. That is a very destructive,
yeah,
divisive way. And you just like it because you think that, you know, you are the final end of the road. You are the
it
end of
was
the
all
road.
about you. It's ego.
Yeah, and you know that you know the total truth, and you tend to not know the total truth. You tend to have one perspective to look at the world from, and integrating all of those different perspectives without actually falling into the trap of saying, yeah, they're all valuable enough. Because there is a thing of like, if somebody makes a super racist argument, you go like, maybe, mate, that's
Yeah,
not. worth listening to. So you must not fall into that trap either. You see, navigating these big things isn't all that easy, but it's always easy to just bitch about a politician, bitch about a status quo, bitch about some sort of concept that's out there, rather than doing the hard yards of actually building upon it bit by bit in a slow churn.
I so get that. I so get that. And I certainly got that when I used to train people in innovation was, you know, one of our things was is it needs to be similar enough to the status quo to be recognizable, far enough away from the status quo to be exciting and make
Yeah,
movement towards it. And it has to improve the journey or the life that you get from the other end of it, or the product or the whatever it is. And but if it missed out on those two things, its chance of success were very low. Had to be
yeah.
enough to understand. I've got a last question for you, which is nothing to do with what you do, which I have a thing that I do called an emotional floor plan,
Okay,
and I'd love to do this with you, which is it's pretty simple, but it's a thing that I do with clients and take them through a process, and I'm just going to do it with one room with you, and that
let's
would
do it.
be, what's your favorite room in your house?
The living room. That's the messy kitchen, open kitchen, living room. It's an absolute mess because we have two kids who play mostly in there. But that's where the fun stuff happens. Endless toys, endless mess. But we're playing there. We very much handed over the room to the kids, so it's safe. Meaning you can just. By safe, I don't mean physically safe, but I mean like we don't buy white suede couches and hope that the kids. This is the whole idea. Is like anything can get damaged, so to speak. I don't care. Not that I'm encouraging this, but it's the idea of like I want this to be a friendly, welcoming kids' room, a 1 year old and a 4 year old. So I'm not talking about destructive teenagers here.
No, 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 no. It's just it's a space for family, and it's that place. When you go to that room, if you had to sum it up with one emotional word, what would you say for you?
What's joy? It's just
Joy.
joy, playfulness, playing with the kids, and doing this together as a family of four. Yeah, that's the nice stuff.
And if it brings you joy to be in that space, as chaotic as it could be, how does your brain order that?
Well, it's in a sense you want to we accepted chaos. We got like this is not going to be in Better Homes and Garden magazine anytime soon. This room, and then you create mini order. So I got like, well,
Huh?
before we leave the house for the day or whatever, we need to clean the floor so that the
Yeah,
robot can clean. The vacuum
yeah. We need
can
to
clean
pick stuff
properly.
up.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's it. And we go, yeah, we have like little remote cars with the 4 year old. We go like, we can drive those indoors, outdoors, but we can only drive them indoors if the floor is clean. Okay, so it's a little way off. So, but it's not as chaotic as it could be because it's not pure anarchy, but it's approaching.
But this actually keeps you highly functioning and alive and in your joy state.
Absolutely. That's the fun stuff. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. It's so as an emotional room, you need, if as the kids get older, there will be either another place or it may not be a room in the house, but it will be somewhere where you can continue to have this play and this chaotic nature where it's out of order, but it's in order. That there's
Yeah,
this, yeah,
I like that. Yeah,
yeah,
and it is to create this kind of room, so to
of
speak, this
course.
space,
Yeah.
in whatever way it would be. And
And it will develop over time, but because it's feeding and it's got all these dynamic pieces in it that make a family, you're fully in there. You're part of the chaos, as opposed to trying to be the ringleader of it. You're just a player.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, well, of course, as a parent, you have to
A
enforce
little bit of
certain rules.
ringleading.
Don't beat the little fella or whatever. But ultimately, yeah, we try to have the long leash.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
absolutely, and it's a safe leash. That's the other thing. It's safe. Simon, absolutely amazing chat. I've got so many notes, and I could talk for another 10 hours easily. But I'm
Awesome.
mindful of
Absolute
time.
pleasure. It was a
Uh,
great fun.
we've got to do it again sometime, and I want to
Anytime.
introduce you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to introduce you to some other people. As a speaker, as I said at the start, absolutely incredible as a speaker. So much information and so easy to understand, and you can break it into very directive pieces. So people who are listening to this, if you want to understand parts of the future and you want to understand that in depth and around the subjects that maybe interest you, as opposed to just what we've spoken about, by all means, we will post all Simon's details, how you get hold of him. As a keynote speaker, he is absolutely incredible, the energy he brings and the knowledge he brings to it. And then as a consultant, it goes beyond that as well, because it becomes very specific about what it is that's going to make a difference for your firm or for you and how you're viewing the future. Simon, so appreciate you, man.
No, I thank you. It was absolutely fantastic, good fun.
Thank you for tuning into our conversation. I hope it left you both informed and inspired. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen, and please don't hesitate to share your design thoughts with me. It's always a joy to hear from you. If you're like me and crave a deeper dive into design thinking, coupled with a love for travel and adventure, consider one of my architectural adventures. Join me and some of my wonderful design friends and embark on a journey of a lifetime. Apply for an unforgettable design experience at adrianramsey.com. With our clients spanning the globe, I firmly believe behind every great project are great people. If you're a great person and seeking to turn your dream into a reality, I'd be honored to design your home with you. Why not join the ranks of our exceptional clients? And let's make your heart sing. Reach out to me at studio@ardesignhouse.com. That's studio@ardesignhouse.com. And let's get a conversation going and make your heart sing.